Hello, Vicky.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Welcome to Sunday Papers Live. Wonderful to have you here with us. So tell us what a financial psychotherapist is and what you do.
So I help people better understand their relationship with money. And I see people that struggle with money in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes they misuse it to act out emotional issues. They might become overly generous or hoard money and not find a way to allow it to enable happiness. They might be holding financial secrets from family, friends, their partners. So all sorts of different presentations related to money. And what I help them do is understand, yes. So what I help them do is better understand what is at the roots of the money behavior that they're unable to change.
And why did you become a financial psychotherapist?
So there's both a personal and a professional reason. I'll start with a professional, it's easier. Sandwiched between two psychology degrees, I have an MBA degree. And even though in my business degree, we did cover the psychology of money a little bit, so you do behavioral finance and you find out about the cognitive biases that get in the way of us acting rationally when it comes to money. In the psychology degree, it wasn't focused so much. And of course, well, behavioral finance will look at what people in general might do with money irrationally. Psychotherapists look at the individual. And I said, well, you know, we have all these tools as psychotherapists to help people understand their relationship with food, with sex, with all these other things. Why are we not helping them understand their relationship with money, which is such a part of living a life, and people talk about it in therapy? And so I started researching and writing more about that. And then, of course, there's always an emotional connection when you find kind of a purpose. And for me, it was my own family had its own very complicated relationship with money. And I took that to therapy, to my personal therapy. And I really learned a lot from it. And it helped me, you know, not repeat past mistakes and have a different relationship with money myself.
And why do you think money is such a taboo for many people?
I think it's because talking about it is not normalized, and therefore we're in the dark about what people think when it comes to money. You see, I don't think it's not knowing what's in their bank accounts, it's not knowing what's in their minds, what views do they hold, what do they consider too greedy or too generous. You know, we all have different parameters when it comes to how we should spend, should save. And because we don't talk about them, then we're afraid of judgment, of criticism, and that kind of fuels the taboo.
Now, you've written a book, which we're actually selling here at the back today, so do go and check it out. And actually, Vicky's going to stay and sign some copies for 20 minutes after this conversation, so you can grab yourselves a copy. In the book, you talk about relationship to money stemming from childhood experiences. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. So what has been written about money so far in terms of childhood experiences tends to stick to what money lessons we were taught when we were little. But in my experience as a psychotherapist, I find that there's a lot of experiences in our childhood that shaped our personality, our sense of agency, our sense of deservedness. And all these things influence what we do with money. So if you think about it, if you don't feel deserving of good things, it might be difficult to enjoy money and not feel guilty about it. Or it might feel difficult to have a bank account full of money and not somehow let your low sense of self get in the way. And then next thing you know, you made a bad investment choice and you lost it all. Or, for example, if you think about the sense of agency, if the majority of experiences you had growing up was of asking for something and being told, no, you know, go away, you can't have this, then what emotional imprint will that leave you with? You know, where will you find the confidence to walk into a salary negotiation and ask for more money, or to pitch to a client and trust that they will say yes rather than shoo you away, which is what your experience tells you people do. But even our experiences attaching to our caregivers. So the way we set up relationships can influence what we do with money in relationships. So if you think about it, if you grew up being the person that always gives more than they receive, then you might be too generous with money or become too dependent, because that's the way in which you get reassurance from others that they're going to look after me financially. It means they care, they want to leave me. And so you see how deep-seated emotional issues get acted out through money. So people may come with a money problem to therapy, but once you start pulling that thread, you go to deep places within them that really have impacted a lot of their choices in life, not just their money choices.
Another thing you talk about in your book is self-sabotage. How can some people get in their own way when it comes to finances?
In all sorts of different ways. We might spend too much on a failing business venture. We might give too much money to others, which comes from a place not from what we believe is fair or reasonable to give, but it comes from a place of wanting to compensate from something that we feel we're lacking internally. There's many different ways in which people get in their own way, but what I'm interested in is, why is this happening? What is at its source? And I'll give you an example that's in the book. There was one person who came to me, and on the surface, it looked like an overspending problem. So they ran out of money after 2 weeks. They received an allowance from their father. Parents were divorced, but they ran out of money after 2 weeks. And so I went through the typical questions that you might ask somebody who overspends. When do you overspend? Is it, in the evening when you're bored or lonely? Is it with a certain group of people? Trying to investigate, what is this about? And then the question that kind of unlocked it was, what do you do once you run out of money? And they said, well, I call my mother. And I'm like, and how's that relationship? Well, we don't really talk ever since my parents got divorced, and that's the only time I speak to her. And so you can see how giving up that bad financial habit was going to risk losing the only relationship they had with a mother. So the work was about, how else can I relate with my mother? How can I establish a relationship from a different point of view, instead of just sabotaging financially to get that contact, that connection that I miss?
So that's a brilliant example of how you helped one individual with their self-sabotage. How do you typically help your clients with self-sabotaging habits?
It is about investigating what is at its roots. So I will not go through, a set questionnaire or anything like that. I start with what the person brings in the room, and then you start picking around it. And you ask different questions. You sometimes have to open up the therapy a bit, more broadly, and understand, well, how do they relate with other people in their life? Are they somebody who generally tends to be, let's say, too giving at their own expense, what we call masochistic? Are they somebody who tends to be very chaotic, and so the sabotage is actually a consequence of them not being very organized or having a very kind of chaotic way of approaching anything in their lives? So it's an investigation, but asking the right questions, I suppose.
And what about Gen Z and their relationship to money and spending and the future of finances? What's your take on Gen Z?
Well, what I hear a lot about is frustration, I think would be the predominant feeling that they bring around not being able or not feeling like they're positioned to have the financial security and stability that they saw their parents have. So the prospect of buying a house feels unachievable. And so you get all sorts of different resulting behaviors and feelings from this. So there's a lot of money anxiety. We're dealing with all sorts of different uncertainties. First it's inflation, then it's recession, then it's wars, and that kind of stirs a lot of anxieties in people. But then you also get different, what we call acting out behaviors. So instead of managing those anxieties and thinking, well, this is what I can control, this is what I'm going to do about it, and this is what I can't control. You get people who do what we call doomsday spending. So they say, well, if I'm never going to be able to achieve the financial objectives that I wanted to achieve, I might as well enjoy it and spend it all today, which of course is not the best strategy, not in the short term and not in the long term, because not only are you stuck with the same feelings of frustration and anxiety, but now on top of it, you might feel guilty, because when we spend from a place of anger and resentment, we tend to overspend, and then we might end up in debt. And so on top of all the feelings you were struggling with in the first place, now you have guilt, you have financial anxiety, plus you don't know how you'll feel, in 10 or 20 years about these choices, and you're not kind of accounting for that. So you might actually down the line regret having been so free with your spending, and what you're not considering is that putting even a little bit of money on the side with time might be enough to maybe achieve a more realistic financial objective.
So is the goal here to be super rational when it comes to money and try and take all of the emotion out of it? And is that even possible?
I don't think it's possible, and that's why I don't think that's the objective. It's impossible not to feel a bit nervous when you're signing mortgage papers, talking about buying property. And actually, I think it's healthy that one should be aware of the responsibility they're taking on when they're doing that. But what I could talk about in the book is what I call financial emotional awareness. So you need to be conscious of the feelings that are driving your financial choices, but not let them be solely in the driving seat, so that you're making choices blindly from these unconscious emotions, but that you're taking them into account and asking yourself, is this really what I want to do? And I think that applies for big life choices, but it applies for small things as well. Why am I tipping twice what is expected of me? Is that coming from my insecurity, or is that because I used to have a waiting job myself, and I know how little they get tipped, and I want to, give something back or do something that is in line with my values? You see, those are very different positions to be making those choices from. In the book, I give an example of a person that decides to spend their first bonus that they receive in their first job. They spend it all on a luxury holiday. And I actually talk about two different people who do the same thing. But one person is doing it unconsciously, so they haven't thought this through. So they're so excited with this first paycheck, they book this holiday, they go on it, and then when they come back, they're full of kind of regret, guilt. What did I do? Now I'm never going to be able to buy the car that I had my eyes on, and this and that and the other. The other person who has thought the choice through, realized that actually, ever since I was young, I was the one kid on the school meal that couldn't afford to go on the trips, and I would watch all my friends come back from their fancy holidays. I was always the one who didn't have that, and now I want to treat myself to that, and I'm doing it consciously. I know the trade-offs that come with that. I know that I won't be able to buy that car as early as I wanted to, but this is a choice that I'm making consciously. And you see, it's very different how that feels, and so that's the objective.
I can imagine you see lots of overcompensational behaviour happening. So you are the UK's first financial psychotherapist. Do you think this is now a new role that you've established in the industry that we'll see more of?
I hope so. And I guess what I want to say is that I'm not doing anything differently from other psychotherapists, but the fact that I'm calling myself a financial psychotherapist has given a lot of people who didn't know they could talk about money in therapy almost permission to do so, because before I called myself that, a lot of times, money would come up and people would apologize about it. They would say, I'm sorry, this might sound superficial, or sorry if this makes me sound materialistic. And actually, when people talk about money, sometimes they're not talking about money at all. They're talking about power, security, fairness, equality, their desire to be loved or to be taken seriously. Money can represent all of these things for people, and so we shouldn't be ashamed talking about it or wanting to explore it at a deeper level. We should be curious about what are we letting it represent in our lives, and is that something we want to continue to do?
Yeah, you talk about it representing as a symbol, and I think that's what you're saying in that last statement.
That's right. It can be a symbol of all these different things. For some people it's freedom, and if we don't make a choice about that, then it'll get acted out in all sorts of unhealthy ways.
What is the most common thing that you're seeing crop up in your clinic?
I think there's two ways to answer that, because in a way, there's the most common money problems out there, and I think overspending is very common, financial anxiety is very common, insecurities around asking for a raise, or there's some kind of women-specific issues around feeling deserving of equal pay and things like that. And then there's the people that come to see me, and the people that come to see me come at a crisis point, and so sometimes they're not the most usual cases. So I might see people that struggle with financial domination, for example, or over generosity, which is not a common problem, but I've seen people kind of destroy all of their finances because of compulsive giving. So there's kind of some of the people I see are more on the extreme end of the spectrum.
And what about in family dynamics? What's the most common issue for families when it comes to finances?
In my experience, it's around either differences about how money should be divided or spent, especially in sibling relationships. It can be a hot topic. And of course, inheritance is always one, or succession planning, and wealth transfer is another one that comes up, because inevitably people will have their interpretations about what does it mean when my parents left much more to my sister than me, or how do I make sense of the fact that they gave it all to charity and left almost nothing to us, or all these different scenarios when they aren't explained and talked about, and people find out later without a chance to ask questions. It can be really emotional.